This is a strange miracle that Jesus performs in Cana of Galilee. While our familiarity with the story may serve to shield us from its oddness, it nonetheless stands out as a sort of superficial crisis that's occurring. The guests would always remember it, and it would provide much fodder for gossip in Cana. But for Jesus to solve this problem that's happening in Cana, the lack of wine, does it really seem to compare to when Jesus heals the lepers or casts out demons or raises the dead to life? Does this cross anyone else as just a little trivial? We're all used to Jesus meeting people in the midst of a trial, a low point in life, but here, Jesus is, instead of interrupting people's sorrow with the promise of life and wholeness, he's sharing in their joy and their gladness and performing a miracle here. What the wedding guests would eventually discover is what you and I, as disciples of Jesus, already know to be true. That is, the wine always runs out. A winning streak is bound to be broken. A soaring market will reach its plateau. A new car will all too soon need repairs. The natural effects of aging will inevitably win out on our bodies, no matter how good we eat and how much we exercise. The wine eventually fails for each of us. In his book, Counterfeit Gods, the late Tim Keller looks at a story in the book of Genesis that he thinks illustrates how the things we put our hope in this life are only ever bound to fail us. It's the story of Jacob, Abraham's grandson. Jacob falls in love with a beautiful girl named Rachel, and as was the custom of the day, he made an arrangement with her father Laban to work for him 7 years in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. When the wedding day comes, Laban pulls a fast one. Jacob loved Rachel so much that we're told that those 7 years felt like nothing to Jacob. He was just ecstatic. He wasn't paying attention, apparently, and Laban disguises Leah, whom the scriptures describe as his older, less attractive daughter, and sends her in to be married to Jacob in place of Rachel. Jacob thinks that he's getting Rachel, but as the Genesis narrative tells us, in the morning, behold, it was Leah. Keller concludes, with all due respect to this woman from whom we have a lot to learn, no matter what we put our hopes in the morning, it always turns out to be Leah. It is never Rachel. The wine always runs out. Reuben Carter, the Hurricane, was a middleweight boxer who spent almost 20 years of his life wrongfully in prison for a triple homicide. While in prison, he writes an autobiography, and in 1974, this autobiography finds its way into the hands of Bob Dylan, which inspired Dylan's song, Hurricane. The song brought renewed attention to Carter's case and highlighted the racial profiling and lack of evidence that led to his arrest and his sentence. In an interview years later, Carter described Dylan as someone who was always searching. He said that once he got out of prison and once the charges were reversed, he got to know Bob a bit, and he said, every time I would see Bob, I'd ask him, hey, Bob, have you found it? And Dylan would respond, yeah, I found it. And with a hearty chuckle, Carter said in the interview, I knew he hadn't, because I could tell he was still searching for something. At the South by Southwest keynote address in 2012, Bruce Springsteen said that every single song he's ever written could be summed up in one song by the Animals. We got to get out of this place. If it's the last thing we ever do, we got to get out of this place. Girl, there's a better life for me and you. Dylan's yearning for a just society, Springsteen's longing for a better life away from his hometown, U2's quest for desire, an admission that they still haven't found what they're looking for. These artist songs that we love so much, they resonate with us because they're an admission of what all of us already know to be true. The wine always runs out. A few chapters later in John's Gospel, Jesus says to his disciples, I have come that you might have life, and that you might have it more abundantly. It's a verse that's always struck me as a little curious. Jesus didn't say that he came to bring us abundant life, but he came to bring us more abundant life. He came that we might have life more abundantly. He came, in other words, to keep the party going. The guests at this marriage enjoyed a great feast. There's an indication from the steward of the feast that the wine was of a good vintage and the guests were impressed. The only problem is that it just didn't last. What those guests discovered in Cana that day is the very thing that disciples of Jesus have known about him ever since. He just loves to make a good time even better. We don't know how much wine was consumed when it had dried up at this point. We don't know if it was bad planning that led to this or if more people showed up than were on the guest list. But the steward of the wedding suggests that they had had a good time at this point. If a breathalyzer was to be passed around, they wouldn't have made the cut, which makes this miracle even more audacious. 6 stone jars holding the water that would become wine. That, with 30 gallons or so in each of them, would equal, in today's measurements, over 900 bottles of wine. Over 900 bottles of wine. In little old Cana of Galilee, a town with maybe a couple hundred, maybe not more than a couple thousand, 900 for round 2. That seems outlandish, irresponsible, unthinkable. Then you're beginning to get the point of this story. Here's how the 20th century American poet Richard Wilbur described this miracle. It made no earthly sense unless to show how whatsoever love elects to bless brims to sweet excess that can, without depletion, overflow. In a world where even the abundance we experience will inevitably run dry, Jesus offers each of us here today a more abundant life, so that those who drink of the cup that he offers will never thirst again. For the same Jesus who turns water into wine is known today to still turn wine into blood and sinners into saints. Oh, taste and see how gracious the Lord is. Happy, blessed, satiated, full are all those who put their trust in him. Amen.